Father, you know all things, and nothing about this conversation surprises you. Father, I pray for Sebastian as he leads. I pray for those who are gathered both currently and remotely in the future. Father, we just pray that you allow us to be good stewards of the resources you've provided. We're grateful for your blessing, grateful for the call you've placed on us, and ask that your Spirit leads those in leadership so that we can educate others to more fully grow into their calling to follow you. We just pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that, for opening us in prayer, Brent. So my name is Sebastian Matthew, and we'll introduce those who are in this session, each in order. I am the Vice President of External Affairs at Holy Apostles College and Seminary in Cromwell, Connecticut. I've been in that position for 9 years, and before then I was Associate Professor of Intercultural Studies at Kenrick Glennon Seminary in St. Louis. So I've been in seminary for 20 years, and I'm no closer to ordination than the day I started back in 2000. I am the chair of a group called FOLD, which is the Faith-Based Online Learning Directors. FOLD began in the fall of 2013 as a spin-off from the Technology and Theological Education group of the Association of Theological Schools, where I served as founding chair from spring of 2008 to the fall of 2012. And over the past 7 years, FOLD has had interesting conversations like this. Whenever there is an online learning director who is interested in having a conversation about something, we come together in a group, and hopefully these conversations have been fruitful over the past 7 years for expanding institutional engagement of online teaching and learning. And we can see from what's happening in ATS this summer, where ATS is going to drop its residency requirement for ministerial programs, kind of like the way it dropped its residency requirement for academic programs back in the summer of 12. So our accrediting body has very much opened itself up to the kind of thing that we're going to be discussing today, which is the kind of thing that this grant is in part intended to be used for. But before we jump into the grant, if the people on the call could briefly introduce themselves in the same way that I've just done, and we can start with Brent.
Yeah, I'm Brent Sleesman, president at Weinbrenner Theological Seminary. I've been in this role for about 4.5 years. And so we became aware of these funds several weeks ago, like many others, caught by surprise. And so I'm trying to be a good steward of the resources. And so I appreciate the forum to hear more what other people are doing, and just maybe share how we're approaching this at our school as well.
Steve?
Yeah, hi, my name is Steve Swallow. I'm the Vice President for Finance and Administration at United Theological Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, so a little bit south of where Brent's located. And like Brent said, a few weeks ago, found out about these grants. Honestly, really didn't think it applied to us, that we would be eligible. Reading Sebastian and Brent's comments in the thread on the ATS posting site, and really started to get curious. Met with Brent this morning, so I'm excited to hear what more we have to learn about this. But our board meeting's in a couple of weeks, but I have a call with our president at 3 o'clock today to talk about what we need to do in relation to this grant.
Sure. Well, Steve, you're at the school where Phyllis Innes is at.
Yes.
And Phyllis took over from me as chair of the Technology and Theological Education group when I stepped down in the fall of 12. She stepped up. So you've got a winner.
Yeah, did you know she's retiring at the end of this academic year?
That is very cool. Also a bit sad. Can you keep her on as a consultant for maybe a few more decades?
Yeah, she'll hang around a little bit.
Very cool. So, Marcus?
Hi. Sorry, just got my tech stuff all set up. Yeah, Marcus Mcarthur. I'm Vice President for Administration at Westminster Seminary, California. We're located in Escondido, which is North County, San Diego. And I actually learned about this grant through through Sebastian, the ATS thread. So thank you for that. And so our executive council team is kind of in the early stages of researching it, and I've followed that thread and all those links, and yeah, so I'm just here to find out more information, and something we probably will pursue. And at this point, we're probably thinking of, we've never done online before until we were forced to. We're a small residential seminary that focuses on face-to-face residential theological training, and so we'll probably use a good chunk of it toward tech upgrades in our classrooms, and then probably the other large chunk for scholarships or some sort of tuition reduction to help students.
Sure. And Brent's going to have something to say about that in terms of a process by which to decide how these funds would be allocated.
Great.
Because we really do have to get a narrative together concerning why are schools accepting the money. And Brent's already posted. He's like way ahead of everybody else on this. And that's one of the reasons why I'm delighted that he's here with us today. So we just were joined by Mark Mcveigh, and Mark, we're introducing ourselves. There's a few of us in the call, and it's being recorded for the purpose of posting on the distancelearningdirectors.org website, which is the faith-based online learning directors, and then it'll be shared out with the members of ATS Engaged. So Mark, do you want to provide a brief introduction of yourself?
Oh, sure. I just joined. I'm sorry. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah. My name is Mark Mcveigh. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment at Westminster Seminary, California. My colleague Marcus is here as well, and he just noted this for me. So I just joined a little late, so I missed the first few minutes. But we're working through this process right now of applying for the grant, so I thought this would be helpful.
Very cool. Well, welcome, Mark. Okay, so my method here, I've got a few slides, and as I go through them, we can talk our way through them, and then we can talk about what we're doing, what our plans are, and what are some useful things that that schools can be doing, or at least thinking about. And we may not have all the answers at this point because this is still very new. It is a novel $500,000. But we can come up with some good questions, I think. And sometimes having good questions beats having answers that we think could be generalized to everybody, since no answer is 100% generalizable. Based on the differences in our schools. So this presentation is called It is Friday. Do you know where your $500,000 is? And my entry button is Who Cares? Because of the CARES Act, we have some funding, is basically the point. And we've learned about it in the past few weeks. And the funding that applies to us most directly are two kinds within the CARES Act. One is the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funds, and we'll talk about that first. And the other is the larger federal funding that brings all the schools up to at least $500,000. Now, the interesting thing about this is that some of our theological schools don't qualify for that FIPSE section of the grant. And the reason they don't qualify is because they're embedded into larger institutions that did receive more than $500,000. So the embedded theological schools, at least I've learned this in conversation with some of them, cannot apply for that $500,000. So I told one of them to go to the provost at the major university and simply just ask. I was like, can you pass that $500,000 down to us? And he laughed and said, well, let me give you the guy's number. You could advocate on our behalf. So let's talk about the HERF grant. So Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. This grant comes in two phases or two parts. And I'll show you the first part is that which is given to students. And the second part is that which institutions can use. So this money is divided based on what our full-time equivalency is. And so if you look at www.ed.gov, that's where they've got the release form, you can find that in the first allocation, institutions were encouraged to apply for money that they could hand directly to students in the form of grants that would assist those students who were disrupted or experienced financial challenges because of COVID-19. So the key piece of that information, if there are things that you can look at here, like the letter from the secretary and so on and so forth, but basically all that simply identifies what I just said. This is the interesting piece, allocations for section 18004A1. So if you're wondering what your allocation is, the government's published a list where it's given out the exact amount that all the schools are qualified to receive. And if I were to go to my school, Holy Apostles College and Seminary, I found out on the day this was released that Holy Apostles was eligible for $22,522. And then I noticed this number, $11,261. Now, I didn't notice this at first. My financial aid officer noticed it. And she pointed out that half of the total allocation has to be spent directly on students. But the other half of that allocation could be spent on institutional needs. For instance, in our discussions, we said, well, we know that we've got a need because we still have students on campus in the dorms, and they're doing remote emergency instruction. This was through the spring term. They were maxing out the wireless network. And so the network that had worked well, at least reasonably well, prior to all the students being dispersed on their own to do their classwork from their own computers, was suddenly becoming overtaxed. So we could take this $22,000 we learned, apply half of it to student grants, and give the other half institutionally, which is the same amount, into the administrative fund in order to take care of a real and present need, which in our case was the wireless network. Now, the interesting thing, and let me jump back to the presentation. The interesting thing is we learned that to give the money to the students, when they first told us we could do that, there was not very much direction. And then they came out with some direction. We could only give it to on-campus students, or students who are residential, not to online students. So that lowered the number of possible recipients considerably, since most of our students are taking classes online. We only have about 120 on campus. Then, from the students that are on campus, we couldn't give it to students that were ineligible for Title IV funding. So that suddenly knocked it down to about 17 students who were eligible. And it's an $11,000 allocation. So then we had to come up with a formula for how those students would be able to receive this money. So shortly after we dealt with all of that, we learned that we need to put somewhere on our website what it is that we did with the money. So let me start the presentation again so I can click. So this is a sample text that we came up with. Simply letting people know this is a matter of public disclosure, so it falls under mission integrity within the ATS standards. We've received an allocation of money. We have a protocol for its distribution, and letters are going out in mid-May, so that's about now. So that being done, we believe that we will easily fulfill the requirements of both the half that was allocated for direct student aid in the HEERF portion of this grant money, and the half that was allocated for institutional use. Then, we learned of this one, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, known as FIPSI. Secretary DeVos came out and said that what we want is for all the schools in higher education to receive at least $500,000. And for those that received only very little during the HEERF portion, that money could be deducted from $500,000 and the balance could then be given to the school. So I'll click on this first, and I'll come to what Weinbrenner has posted, what Brent has posted for Weinbrenner. So in the FIPSI portion, the interesting thing to do is click under formula allocations under the PDF. Now, what happens is you suddenly have a much larger, much more expanded set of numbers. So again, it's all a matter of public record. So I'm not revealing any state secrets here. But when I put in Holy Apostles, I learned that we had received an allocation of, or were eligible for an allocation of $22,522. So I knew that was already the case, and I knew we had already applied for it, and I knew we had already received it. Because once you upload something to grants.gov, you move through a series of steps. You click submit, or you click verify to make certain that everything's in order. Then you click submit, and you receive a letter, an email almost instantly saying, we've received this. And then shortly after, you receive an email saying, this has been accepted. And then shortly after, you receive an email saying, you've been moved to an underwriter who will allocate the funds. And then whoever is in charge of G5 drawdowns at your institution can then log into their system once the funds have been released and draw that money down. So we did that with the $22,522 already in 2 disbursements of $11,261 each. But notice this number here, $477,478 remains within our allocation. So what I did was I clicked on the certificate of agreement, and I filled it out, and I went back to my grants.gov portal, and I uploaded it in the same way that I had uploaded the other 2, and we are about to receive $477,000. Now this is where it gets interesting. What do we do with the money? We have to come up with some kind of plan and some kind of way to justify our receipt of that money. So I give Weinbrenner, Brent in particular, a great deal of credit for not only having come up with a plan, but already having had a conversation with his board. And I'll just simply read this, and I'll then ask Brent to talk to us a bit. He wrote in the Weinbrenner.edu blog an article entitled "Why Weinbrenner is Accepting the CARES Act Funds." So he's already ahead of the curve in terms of disclosure to his public. Our plan is to use the funds for lost revenue from our affiliated denomination, enhancing IT infrastructure, personnel costs, and student aid in the form of reduced tuition. All of this falls within the purview of what his funding will be able to be used for. All of our funding can be used for this kind of thing. So, Brent, could you talk a bit about how you amazingly brought the board together to have this discussion in such a short time.
A couple quick preface points, and then I'll answer your question, Sebastian. I think you've highlighted this is unique because of the public nature of the distribution. Usually whenever we think about funds being distributed for financial aid or other government or grant funds, it's not quite as public as this is. And so I think that adds a dimension that we need to be sensitive to, that anybody with an internet connection and awareness of this issue can find out how much money our schools are receiving. And when you couple that with questions that, and I've had a few conversations, excuse me, over the past week, that when you couple that with questions that some folks have about how the federal government, whether in fact the Department of Education Secretary in fact distributed these funds truly aligned with how Congress desired, and I'm not getting into that debate. I'm simply saying for some that is a point of contention, that we're on a list that some people believe that we should not be on. And so I think that we need to have, I think we need to be aware of potential scrutiny. And I think this is a time that we think about being above reproach and being very honest about it actually allows us to lend credibility to the education that we offer, as opposed to contributing to the perception some already have that theological education of any, whether it's higher education or continuing education, whether we are really truly serving the public good. And so I think this is a chance for us to legitimately demonstrate, yes, we are, and we're aware of some of the larger issues. So to your question specifically, fortunately, when we became aware of this, we were preparing for a Board of Trustees meeting already. And so this was a bit of God's timing, not us being really wise with what we were trying to schedule. We already had a board meeting scheduled for May 7th and 8th, and what we desire to do. So I can summarize very quickly the process we walked through, but I will note that our board meeting was already scheduled. We did not assemble the board specifically for this purpose. We immediately had an internal conversation regarding how we felt, when I became aware of the funds, how we felt it would be best to use the funds. And so we already were aware of the reduced revenue from the affiliated denomination. We're aware of, and when enhancing IT infrastructure, that's a fancy way of really saying the technologies themselves, the devices. At this point, working remotely, we're not necessarily looking to enhance cabling and connections and so on campus as much as the resources and the equipment itself. Personnel costs, this allows us for sure. I don't want to get into specifics in this forum, but this allowed us for certain to carry through with our commitment to our current employees, and I think that represents both the letter and the spirit of the funds. The thing where the majority of our money is going to be dedicated to is that student aid piece, and what we're looking at is testing, using these funds to provide some testing for a different revenue or different tuition model, and I can talk about that if there's interest. But we had that conversation. I made a proposal to our executive team and said, here would be my proposal for utilizing the funds, and you can look it up. Weinbrenner's about $487,000. And so we had a conversation internal to our executive team. When we went to the board meeting, then we were in agreement as an executive team about what steps we would take to use these funds. And we were still living a little bit in that these really can't be funds we're actually going to get, are they? So there was still a little of that spirit. And so we took it to the board. We took two budgets to the board, one on the assumption we run from a July 1st to a June 30th fiscal year. And so budget one was on the assumption that we do not get these funds. Budget two was on the assumption that we do in fact receive these funds. And so that allowed us to draw some distinction of what these funds enabled us to do. So the board affirmed that here's what the plan would be, and I shared with them, similar as I'm talking now with them, obviously a little more detail, Here's what we would do with the funds if we receive them. The board affirmed that. And this way, whenever we actually receive the funds and begin working from July 1st in the new fiscal year, we have full staff approval. We have full board approval. And I guess the final comment at this point is, for me, this is just good decision-making, sound decision-making process that we were fortunate to be able to follow through on this. This is a significant amount of funding. We're a small seminary as well. And so I think the challenge in this case is not to change good, sound decision-making simply for the sake of the funds. And so whatever somebody follows in a given institution, whatever's considered to be good, sound decision-making, I would encourage you to do that. And I think we've been fortunate that we can do that. So internal buy-in, board level buy-in, and so we can move forward in a way that I feel good about for our school as it relates to how we'll make use of these funds going forward.
Well, in terms of your being able to demonstrate through the receipt of these funds sound decision-making, you are going to shine at your next self-study, your next accreditation visiting event.
Well, and honestly, that's this fall, and so we're very mindful that yes, the same agency, the federal government, who we're accredited by, is also the distributor of these funds. So we're not naive to the fact that we need to be sensitive to that point. So, yeah.
Sure. But I mean, the process that you put together is a process that all schools who are receiving these funds should follow. But what I've noticed in the kinds of questions that I've been receiving, not just on the ATS Engaged Study board, but also on or community board, but also through email, is that people are not prepared for this money, and they're still rather clumsily handling their process by which to receive it. So there are many schools that don't have portals yet set up with grants.gov. And so their big question is, okay, how do I apply? How do I become the, what are the technical aspects of my getting set up here? Other schools have rejected federal funding in the past because they're afraid it will bind them to federal regulations, particularly those that they feel would be at variance with their faith tradition. So the money, while it's sitting there, looks good to be able to receive, but there are some people that are like in a position where they don't quite know how to get it. There are those who are receiving it now. They've applied for it all, but they haven't had those internal conversations about what they're going to do with it. So we're in a very awkward place right now in theological education with the number of schools that qualify. And particularly those that thought they would be able to receive it and find that they can't because the university within which they're embedded received a much larger allocation than $500,000. And so the government is not providing the difference to these smaller schools. So the embedded schools are not doing as well, at least in terms of receipt of this federal funding, as the standalone schools. And that's interesting if you look at what ATS is saying in terms of the trajectory of theological schools over the next 20 or 30 years. Most of us, they say, will be embedded. So what does that mean going forward? It may be a different conversation and one that's worth having at another time. So these are some of the things that I've noticed in the conversations that I've been having. Are there any other questions from this group that we might throw out there just to be framing useful questions?
I have a question. This could be for either Sebastian or Brent. With regard to the public notice that I believe you posted on the school's website, is that something that is a requirement under the CARES Act or your accreditation, like ATS, or is it simply a way to anticipate some of the questions that would arise?
Oh, it's required under the CARES Act. That you put a notice that you've received the monies and that you've got some kind of plan. I don't know whether or not it's required to articulate the step-by-step planning. Brent, did you see anything on that?
I would echo that, and we actually have, we should have a separate place. What this is, we have an in-depth blog where we just provide some behind-the-scenes details for seminary education and some of the steps we take. So actually the blog that Sebastian shared is not, we're not using that as our public disclosure. That's simply sharing for venues like this and for others what we're trying to do. I can look for, it should be there. As far as we know, it is a requirement, and my understanding is we should have that posted another place on our site where we have some other disclosures, but it's my understanding that that's a requirement.
Right, and it should be on your main website somewhere where it's obvious where it is and not buried within that website. The stipulations are spelled out here in the letter from the secretary. So if I click on what the letter says, and this is where I went for information on what we can do with the grant. And there's a very broad category of things that you can use it for, and a couple of encouragements. So let's see, right here, let's see, disclosure. To receive grants, students must be eligible, students may demonstrate, yada yada, institutions. We complete a form, and yeah, so I'm somewhere in the documentation is a response to that question, but I am not seeing it off the top of my head. I mean, right in front of me. But I would say that we know that the government is asking us to do that somewhere. It's made that request, but I would say it's also a matter of institutional integrity. So it's the general institutional standards of the Association of Theological Schools, and then whatever regional accrediting body you might have, whether it's WASC or Higher Learning Commission or the New England Commission of Higher Education or Middle States or whatever. They're going to have they're going to require some kind of transparency in the way in which we've received and distributed the funding. So, but this money is not the only money that's coming. There's another $15 million that people will be able to apply for in a competitive grant program. So if you run through the 500,000, there's another opportunity for additional creativity and innovation that your school can pursue within a competitive grant program. The 15 million won't last very long, but it's there for us to apply. So I don't know, maybe we can move on to another question, but I think that that answers that one.
Marcus might have explained our situation a little bit. We were actually aware of this pretty early, April 15th, I think, when the first letter came out from the Department of Education. And in the process of starting the application, we did discover that we were no longer active in the SAM system. So we pretty quickly submitted a notarized letter to appoint an authorized representative so we can update the entity information. As I understand, this is a necessary first step for applying, and we're still waiting for that. So we actually haven't submitted the application for the initial grants or this additional grant yet. I did make contact with someone at the Federal Service Desk this week, and they said that they would review it soon. I think it was just a slow process because of the way their offices are currently structured. But anyway, so I don't know if for the others, if you were already, it's something that we had apparently missed or dropped the ball on in terms of keeping that active. But is there any other advice in terms of, I think we'll have it soon, but speeding up that process perhaps, or dealing with the SAM system and keeping that active as an entity?
Right. Well, in our case at Holy Apostles, we knew that we were in it, in the system. We knew we had the SAMs, we knew we had the DUNs, but the person who originally set all that up for us had long gone. He actually died this year, God rest his soul. So I had to apply to have the name changed, and for me to be the person who was who is then the area coordinator, or the person from our institution who had access to upload things. So the SAMS in some institutions has already been set up, but it's been so long since anybody ever used it that that they don't know who the point person is anymore. And that requires a conversation with your CFO and with the federal employee who answers the phone to get somebody named as the point person for that, so that that person can then, through his or her login, upload the materials. So it's important to get those technical steps figured out as a prelude to this. It's also important to apply for the whole amount, I think. There was one institution that contacted me that said, you know, we are going to apply for this I think they were eligible for $483,000. Should we also apply for the $17,000, the money that should go to the students and that should go to the institution? And I said, absolutely. Never leave money on the table. It's just a basic business principle. Find find something that you can, you've got a good reason to provide money to the students and to give students grants. We were afraid this year, for instance, that with COVID and people being out of work, it's over 20 million Americans, that we would have fewer students signing up for summer or for fall. It turned out that wasn't the case. We haven't suffered in that way. But we did have students who were normally on-campus students who incurred expenses because of COVID. So that was enough of a reason for us to apply for that smaller amount. And to know that we had a matching amount, so we applied for $11,261 to provide to the students, to know that we had a matching amount that we could also apply to an institutional need. For instance, in our case, it was improving the wireless network, was useful. So I would encourage people to go for the full amount. If you notice the encouragements, this is in this section of the Secretary DeVos' letter. She says institutions may also use these funds to, and she names a number of things: defray institutional expenses, and that's how you define what your institutional expenses are. That may include lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with the transition to distance education, faculty and staff training, and payroll. So that's pretty wide. But there are two encouragements here. One, I encourage you to use as much of these funds as you can to give grants to students. And another encouragement, I encourage you to use these awards to expand your remote learning programs and build your IT capacity. This is a boon for distance learning directors. The Faith-Based Online Learning Directors group as an entity, which you can find on distancelearningdirectors.org, has about 65 distance learning directors from among the 300 ATS schools, member schools. Some of our distance learning directors are outside of the ATS network, but all of them would be interested in this kind of opportunity to be involved in this kind of conversation with their administrations. So I would say, if with this kind of encouragement to assist students, to assist the expansion of remote learning programs, that is coming at the same time as ATS's new standards revision, which knocks the standards down from 98 standards, which is what it was prior to this coming biennial, and we're currently sitting on 98 standards. It knocks it down to 18 standards. So those 18 standards that we're about to be able to enjoy, and this doesn't help Weinberner any, because you had to write a self-study for all 98 of the standards. Those 18 standards, which we're now able to enjoy, are going to include the opportunity to have all of our ministerial programs, with the exception of PhD programs, and PhDs aren't ministerial, but all of our ministerial programs 100% online. We simply have to show how those programs still adhere to the standards. That being the case, this $500,000 comes at a very good time and provides a very unique opportunity for those of us moving into this new era of ATS standards. I would encourage everybody to bring their distance learning directors into that conversation with the president, with the vice presidents, with the academic deans, and so on, as to what this means, how these funds can be used going forward. And for those distance learning directors to have a deliberative voice in that conversation. Simply because they're the ones with the boots on the ground running these programs. When it comes to questions about how these programs are going to expand, they've got experience and they've got vision that's going to be useful going forward. Marcus has got to go. He's got a meeting. So it's, God bless you, Marcus. Thank you for coming. It's 2:45 p.m. Eastern Time, 1:45 p.m. Central Time. Are there any other thoughts or any other things that people here would like to share?
Yeah, this is Steve. Just a question. And the numbers around 80,000 was our first, I guess, allocation. And as we read that, and I talked to Brent about this earlier, but we really looked at that as being to cover additional costs to move from on campus to online, or for additional costs for our students to reimburse them for costs that they had to all of a sudden, become online. Well, we do not have any residential housing. And of our students, we probably had about 20 to 30 that were actually on campus taking classes. So for us to make that switch to fully online really didn't require much additional expense for us, or really did it change for our students. So we didn't apply for the 80, but after talking with Brent and going through some things and the, I guess the encouragements that you pointed out in order to increase that IT infrastructure, and then also look at a different tuition model, reducing tuition going forward, we really believe that we can use the 500,000, or I guess the additional 420. So I guess my question is, do we apply for the 80 separate from the 420? So it's really still two applications, or is it one application for 500?
No, it's 3 applications.
Okay.
The first application, and let me jump back on this a bit. The first application is in here. This one on student relief. So let me, when it comes up, I'll point out to you where it is. So it's right here, the certificate of agreement. So this is half of that first allocation. So if you're eligible for $80,000 in that first allocation, $40,000 goes under this particular application. And then if you scroll down, you see the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund institutional portion. This is a separate application. And it looks exactly the same as the first one, except it's got right here the words institutional portion of the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. So you fill it out in the same way that you did before. You want half of that original allocation. If it's 80,000, we'll say, for instance, you type in, my computer's not letting me type in the number, but you would type in 40,000 here, and you would scroll down a bit, and you would just put in the name of the authorized representative, which would be you or your CFO or whomever, your school's OPEID number, and you've got that already, and today's date. This is the entire application. You can see it's got 3, 4, 5 spots. And this one is just put the name of your institution. So, so let me go back. So that's the second one. So there's 2. And then the third one is down here. Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, FIPSI. And it's this one, and it's the same kind of certificate of agreement that you fill out for the larger amount. In your case, it would be $420,000. You upload all 3 of these to a specific spot in the grant portal. And what you need to do in order to get into the grant portal is use this number. It says Ed Grants 0430200005. That's your opportunity number for FIPSI. Your opportunity number for the student grants ends in 003. And your opportunity number for the institutional portion of that first grant ends in 004. Now, if you're from a historically black college and university, there's another opportunity number, 001. If you're from a tribally controlled college with Native Americans, your opportunity number is this. So in the time we have left, let me actually do something interesting. I'm going to go to grants.gov. And I'll show you where to drop in these numbers. So this is the website that I had never seen before COVID-19.
And while you're going there, just to make sure, and I fully agree, don't leave money laying on the table.
Sure.
But again, if we don't believe we qualify for the first 80, we just go straight to the 420.
I would say you may qualify for the first 80. I mean, because the government has already said that you qualify for it based on your FTE. Now, you're saying that most of that FTE is online students anyway.
Right.
Do you have any on-campus students eligible for Title IV funding?
Yeah.
At all? Okay, those are the students that $40,000 can help. And what?
Go ahead. I was just going to say. Yeah. Does it have to go to direct expenses? I mean, we can't just take that $40,000, divide it by 20 students, and apply $2,000 to each one of their past due bills.
You wouldn't use it to pay their bills. You would give it to them directly, and then they could use it for tuition remission. They could give it back to you in whatever way they want. So yeah, if it's 20 students, if that's the formula you come up with, I mean, we came up with a formula that, I think we had 17 students. We came up with a formula that divided that money in two different ways. One way addressed a certain cluster of students that fit certain qualifications, and another way addressed a second cluster of students that fit different qualifications. And in that way, we came up with what would be a fair disbursement to those two groups of on-campus students eligible for Title IV funding. Now notice, eligible for Title IV funding means that they're not DACA. So originally when this first came out, we thought we could use it with our DACA students, but we can't because they're not eligible. Some students who are international students are not eligible because they're not eligible for Title IV funding. So you have to identify which students are eligible, and the letter that's been posted on the website provides you with a formula to help you with that. So, and even if they're not receiving Title IV funds, like you've got students who are on campus who are not recipients of federal financial aid, if they were eligible for federal financial aid, they would be eligible for these grant monies. Does that answer that? And then with the other $40,000, you absolutely have something you can do with that. And this is a time for you to be very creative and innovative. All those things that your distance learning director said, hey, we should be thinking in these directions because it's now the year 2020. And in 2020, online courses that just have static discussion boards may not be what attracts students. Maybe we need to reframe our online courses so that they're more hybrid in nature, so that we actually have community come together in real time with a faculty member who's distant and students who are distant. So the Zoom rooms, for instance, have taught us a lot these past several weeks. And then we have activities that demonstrate they're meeting the learning outcomes in pastoral field experience, for instance. So, I mean, there's lots of creative things that can be done that have never been done, because every time you approach your CFO and say, hey, do we have money for this? And he goes, no, it's not in the budget this year. Sorry, maybe in a future year when we grow or expand or whatever, we can think about it. What we've been given is an opportunity to be innovative in a way we've only dreamed about. In your school, having already come so far, is on the leading edge of that opportunity for innovation, because you don't have some of the problems that schools that are more fully brick and mortar have. at least in terms of operational expenses, or whatever that would necessarily be attendant on brick and mortar schools that have large populations of students on their campus. So I'm going to click Login to grants.gov. And I'm going to, once I log in, and I have to be logged in as me, because I'm the one person in our institution who has this, this power. My particular login gets me into not only the search for grants area, but into the portal where I can upload a grant. So let's see if it's going to let me in. Let me retype my password. There. So under my login, I have something called a workspace. And I can go into the workspace and upload something. But first I need to search for a grant. And the grant I'm going to search for is this one under this opportunity number. So 005, this is the big one. I'm going to copy that opportunity number, and I'm going to drop it into where it says opportunity number, right here. I'm going to hit search. That gives me the exact grant. If you notice, before I did that, let me X out. There's a lot of grants on here. There's things that we could apply for that we didn't even know existed. But I need to find the particular grant that I qualify for. So I'm going to put that number there. I'm going to hit search. Once I hit search, it gives me the exact number, Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, FIPSI, CFDA number 84, yada, yada. I'm going to click that, and that puts me in. And then all I have to do is click apply and upload my documents. It's that simple. And remember, that document that you're uploading is the agreement form that has 5 blanks. Now, once you fill out those 5 blanks and you upload it, or you go to this apply feature, let me see if it'll let me back in since I've already applied. I'm going to give it a name. I don't want to do this again because I might mess something up. I'm going to create a workspace, and it's going to ask me 3 sets of questions. I'm going to click on the first question. I'm going to fill out some blanks. I'm going to click verify. I'm going to click save. It's going to ask me, do I want to make that particular thing unlocked? I'm going to say yes, I want to unlock it. That way the government can see what I've done. Then I'm going to go to the second blank and then to the third. Once I'm done, I click submit. It says, you sure you want to submit this grant application? You say yes. And that's it. You're done. You get an immediate receipt that they've received it. A few hours later, I got another email that said it's been accepted. And a day later, I got another email that said, this has been sent to the underwriting team. It's being funded, is basically what that means. And then the money dropped into our container. And then whoever runs your G5 allocation system, which in our case was our was our business officer, they click into that system and click the draw down the money button, and the money pops into your bank account. I don't think that I've ever received as much instant gratification on a grant proposal as I have on these 3 grants. And I've written $6 million worth of grants over the past decade. This is a very simple process that adheres completely to the Paperwork Reduction Act, which you have to accept as you click your way through. Do you accept the Paperwork Reduction Act? Yes, I do. And then when you're done, you click log out, you close this, or your business officer does, and you move on with your day. How's that for an easy process? Other thoughts? We have a couple of minutes. If there's nothing else, we can say a concluding prayer and go on our way, and then I'll upload this to distancelearningdirector.org.
Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but just making sure, even the second 40, the institutional 40 that we have, doesn't have to be for expenses that we incurred right now. It can be for increasing our IT infrastructure for better distance learning going forward as well.
Right. So the way
Great.
to the way to take that conversation to your president and your board is under Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. Click on the letter from the secretary. This tells you what you can do with it. And again, it's very broad. So the funding for recipients' institutional costs, which I'm making available today through a second certification agreement, is separate from funding previously made available for emergency financial aid grants to students. That's the meaning, that's the second half. I encourage you to use the portion of your award for recipients' institutional costs to expand your remote learning programs, build your IT capacity to support such programs, and train faculty and staff to operate effectively in a remote learning environment. You see, the stipulations on that are roughly the same as the stipulations on the other 420,000. So, and that's what you do with it is the conversation you have with your board and your president. My assistant has shown up. When she was 2 years old, she used to climb on my head. Eva, this is Steve Swallow and Brent Sleesman. Yeah, she didn't know she could be seen. It looked like a good idea when you approached, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Anyways, hey, Dad.
Yes. See you.
Bye.
Any other thoughts? Brent, do you have any final closing thoughts?
No, I appreciate that you've walked through the steps, Sebastian. I think this will be a good resource. And Steve, I appreciate your questions. I think the spirit of these funds is that they help guide us into the future in ways that we may not even know we're going to be impacted by COVID-19, and that's the challenge. But I think asking questions, should we take the funds, before asking how do we use them, is probably a good step. And I appreciate, and that's one thing that I'd like to reinforce for anybody watching this later, that just be mindful of how you use the funds. It is a stewardship principle, and so I appreciate the forum walking us through, Sebastian.
Certainly, and thank you for that that reminder. The should we take the funds? What are the implications for us? And do we have any clear and present needs in terms of if we do take the funds? I guess that's bound up in the question of should we take the funds. But then the rest of it, what do we spend it for? When people buy new technologies, if you recall when Wabash gave all of the theological schools $300,000 back in 1999 and 2000, a lot of people accepted the money before fully understanding how they were going to spend it to technologize their institutions. And that caused problems. The kinds of questions that you're asking, Brent, and you're a real leader in this way, if we ask up front, are much better for us over the long haul than if we ask belatedly. So thank you for that. All right, well, let's close with a quick prayer. Lord, help remind us that we are always in your presence, and help us better understand the nature of institutional stewardship as we move forward in this new era that we're all facing together, which is a beautiful thing, that we're able to come together in community around a common cause and with common conditions. So be with us as we move forward. Please bless Brent, and please bless Steve, and please bless all of our institutions, those who are here present with us now and those that will be watching this later. Come to a better understanding of our role in this new situation, this new world. In Christ's name we pray, amen. All right, that's it.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.